opnames iedere dinsdagavond vanuit de Waag in Amsterdam. Op de achtergrond, wellicht hoor je er nog iets van, is er hier een mooi feest aan de gang. Eerste dag van de week. Normaal hebben we eigenlijk voornamelijk Nederlandstalige gasten, dus we moeten vandaag even aan de bak.
Ja.
Welcome Genevieve Bell. Was it okay? Good enough? Because you gave me all the ways I could say it, so I immediately I started to think, is this the right way? You work for Intel. You're vice president over there, and I was looking at the site. There are a lot of vice presidents at Intel.
Vice presidents.
I thought there was one.
No, it's a big company. There's 106,000 people at Intel.
Yeah.
So lots of senior leaders.
So what do you do?
That is always a good question. My parents asked me that question.
Yeah, so then you must have an answer.
He always says, I'm doing something with the internet.
Yeah.
It's a nice answer. I don't think I'd get away with that. I'm a cultural anthropologist by training, so I study people. That's always the way I think about myself. At Intel, I've been there for a long time now, 15 years, and my job's always been to think about how do you put people into the story of making new technology. So how do you think about what people want, what frustrates them, what they want for themselves, their families, their kids, their communities, what are their kind of pain points and their aspirations, and then use that to think about what sorts of technologies are we building, and are we building ones that will solve those issues and address those markets.
Yeah, a lot of most people will know Intel from Intel Inside.
Absolutely.
So I would think, well, the only thing you do at Intel is make processors, make things smaller, make them stronger, etc.
Well, and it's true. We have just celebrated the 50th anniversary of Moore's Law was over the weekend. So April 19th was the 50th anniversary of the publication of that first paper, right, that says where Gordon Moore, who's one of the founders of Intel, said that microprocessors, integrated circuits, were going to get smaller and faster on a knowable cadence. You know, they would halve in size and double in density every 18 to 24 months. That was the kind of the rule, right? And that rule has held remarkably true over the last 50 years. One of the challenges, though, is that in order to make the right decisions about what IP blocks you need, what kind of technologies you want, what pieces of other technologies you want, what in fact you even want that microprocessor focused on, you need to have an idea about what the future will be.
Okay.
So what is it that people will want to be doing 7 or 10 years from now? And part of my job is
to
have that conversation.
That's very interesting about your job. I mean, I used to go to fairs like the CES and that kind of stuff, and I was always surprised when Intel would actually present their own prototype of a laptop or something else, while in practice you don't make any consumer products at all.
Well, these days we make a few in the wearable technology space, and there's a few of them. Yeah. But really,
so why, if your main business is producing, microprocessors, and other companies make the consumer products, why is your role so important at Intel?
I think they sometimes wonder that too. I think part of it is about how do you have as many different viewpoints on the future as you can. There are the pieces that are deeply technical. So how do we solve material science problems about making Moore's Law true over time? Those are hard problems, right? How do we think about what is the intellectual property we need to develop? What are the ways we need to integrate the pieces together? But also, where are the places we're going to sell that technology? What are the experiences it's going to enable? Is it about being mobile? Is it about being connected? Is it about technology that knows something about you? Is it about technology that you're going to consume a lot of media content or make things? And to have a kind of view about all of that is partly my job. In other companies, you might sometimes describe me as a futurist. I don't really like that label, but there's a part of my job that's about saying, what does the world look like in 3, 5, 10 years' time? Okay, and how do we make sure, what does the world look like? Remarkably like today, actually. It's one of the great things about my job. I mean, the really interesting thing in some ways is the things that make us human, they change really slowly. And the things that we care about as human beings, those things are really slow and consistent, right? The things that we care about and the things that we're anxious about likewise. We've had the same anxieties about technologies for over 200 years. You know, we worry about our jobs, we worry about our language, we worry about our culture, we worry about whether we're all having to move too quickly. Those stories, those anxieties, we had them 200 years ago. I suspect we probably had them before that. So there's something very consistent about the broad landscape in which the future will take place. And then there are pieces in it that move, right? You know, how much of the world will be about devices versus services, where will the data be stored, how will we interact with things, will you still be banging on a keyboard Will you need your useless pen over there? Will you
This
want...
one.
Talk to my...
will you talk to it only if you want to bother him? Will you have a touch screen? All of that stuff, those are the things that are...
So, and Intel needs a vision on the future to be able to have...
Make the right decisions.
Have the right roadmap for their products, So that's extremely important. That's what you said. So that doesn't start with the technology, it actually starts with the people who use the technology.
Yeah, I always think it's a dialogue, right? I think you have to have kind of a point of view about the experiences, a point of view about the markets, and a point of view about the technology. And it's a relationship between those things always, right? It's a little bit of... If you look at the technology and you go, oh my God, here's this whole other thing we'd never thought that you could do, and the technology opens that space up, you want to go pursue it. And sometimes it's about, here's this pain point that people have had for a really long time, we should go fix it. Or here's a market that's emerging with a set of new affordances that hasn't been there before, we should go fill it. And for me, it's always about those three things, right? The technology, the people, and the markets, and you have to navigate between them. And my job's about a piece of that puzzle.
Yeah. You say, I look, just to say the next 5 years, for example, when you look back, how have people surprised you during the last, say, 15 years or something?
Oh my goodness. That's always my favorite question, right? I think the nicest bit about my job, the piece I've always loved, was that I get to go and spend time with people in their homes, in the places they make meaning in their lives, and you get to just watch people do things. And sometimes, it's the really small stuff, right? How are people using technology to keep up with their families? How are they using the internet for that? Or what are they doing with mobile phones? And, sometimes it's really small stuff. It's like, here are the pictures of my kids. I'm now really excited that Skype exists, which is now an old technology, but still has this real power because it's about family stuff, right? My dad discovered Skype about 2 weeks ago. And he's very eager that we should have a relationship on Skype. And he's just like, there's this Skype thing. It sounds really good. So I think this sort of one of the things we forget is that if you're sitting in in some ways in your jobs, in my job, we see the technology really early. And we forget that it rolls out really slowly, right? And that there are still people discovering things we've taken for granted for 3 to 5 years and delighting in them. So the power of some experiences to be wonderful doesn't diminish just because the thing's been on the market for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years. And so for me, the thing that always sort of surprises me is just how inventive people are and how willing they are to kind of push on the technology to get the stuff done they really care about. And how much they're also willing to put up with the way the things don't always work the way they should, right? On my way to come here tonight, I took a taxi. I know I should have taken a train, but I took a taxi. And when I got into the taxi, there were all these screens. So a navigation screen built into the car, a navigation screen bolted over the top, a mobile phone, something in the rear view mirror, I don't know what that was, and some payment system. And the driver looked at me and said, do you mind if I reboot my car? I'm like, what? He's like, well, the payment system isn't working, so I just need to turn the whole thing on and turn it off again. And I'm like, okay. And so we sat there while he turned the engine off, waited for him, I'm sure counted in his head, 1, 2, and then turned the engine back on again. Then all the screens flickered to life, and I thought, oh dear. Yeah. This is a complicated way to live. Yeah. But, clearly he gained value from all of those pieces, and he was willing to put up with the fact that every now and again he needed to reboot his car.
Yeah, but you say a lot of things stay the same. So people are social, so people want to communicate, etc. So you're and what I always say is when you mention the Skype example, when people said, well, technology was complex, and it still is sometimes.
Absolutely.
But when you realize how it helps you, I always said there are no grandparents with grandchildren abroad that don't know how to use Skype, because it's evident. Well, most of them do, because it's evident how it helps them.
I was trying to think about what did that mean about my father's relationship with me, that he's only just discovered this, and I've lived abroad for 25 years.
Well, it's a good thing that he now does it. He does it now. I mean, that's
true.
Let's see it like that.
It's good.
Yeah. And when you say those things stay the same. And when you ask how does it surprise you, I remember a friend of ours used to work at KPN when they were doing the research about texting, SMS, and of course they asked all the people, would you like a service where you could from the shop send a message home or ask what people want, and everyone said no, we don't need that. So I'm always wondering, I always say to people, no one knew that Twitter was going to come. No one knew that. You did?
But I think the trick about that question is it is absolutely the case that it is very hard to ask people, what will you pay money for and use a year or 2 years from now? Or 3 years from now. And it's very hard to say to people, if you've never had a thing, here's this thing I can't even really explain to you. And we can almost imagine what the focus group would have been like, in which you said, so imagine you have this mobile phone thing that you don't really have a lot of yet, and your friends are on it, and you can send little tiny snippets of text. It would have been an almost impossible thing to describe to anyone in a way that was compelling.
Who wouldn't even understand.
Who would have understood it, right?
There's a hilarious video actually taken on the pontoon right here behind the central station, where they actually ask people about the concept of a mobile phone. And they rebroadcasted that, and they asked them 20 years ago, would you like to have a mobile phone? People say, no. Terrible people. I have a phone at home. Why would I need to carry one?
But
people know how to find me, and they can also send me a letter.
Exactly. That's a lovely answer, right? And my suspicion is, though, that there are different ways to ask people that question, right? And different ways to read in the ecosystem. Yeah. If you'd said to people, would you like a lightweight, imagining that you have a mobile phone in your hand all the time, which was already a weird proposition, right? That was not true with text messaging. But imagine that everyone you know has this thing in their hand, and it connects all of us together. Would you like some really lightweight way, some really easy way to let them know you're thinking about them? Everyone would have said yes. Of course we would. And it wouldn't interrupt them. That'd be great. We're like, yes, we love that. Asynchronous? Excellent. The challenge would have then been, how do you technically implement that? And the reality is there's always this interplay, right, between you build platforms and people use them for totally unintended purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, in some ways the internet hasn't exactly rolled out the way the people who were doing the ARPA and DARPA investments thought it would. Yeah. So the trick is, how do you leave room for people to invent on the platform? But also, how do you do a better job of asking people what they want without telling them what the technical solution is? But you ask them about, how do they want to feel? Yeah. What could the experience be like? What is it they're trying to do? Not in a kind of, I need this thing to connect to that thing, and I want, a data messaging system that is low throughput bandwidth. What does that mean?
But then I'm still intrigued how that works with your job within the big, huge Intel corporation. You work with a team of about 100 social scientists and designers.
So I used to. We used to have a lab that had research social scientists, engineers, and designers
who travel the world,
prototyping and making new forms of technology.
And then you come to certain conclusions. And then what happens after that?
I love that. So you should know at this point that there are people like me in almost every technology company on the planet.
But I'm intrigued in the process. Because then you go to then you have the technical people, and
absolutely.
You start talking to them and say, well, I have this idea.
But so it's lots of different things, right? Sometimes it's you go and do ethnographic research, so field studies. You go and spend time with people and you think about, what are the things they care about? What are the pain points they have? What are the barriers that they're experiencing? And you bring that back. Sometimes it's a very clear conclusion. This thing here needs to be more like that. Sometimes it's more subtle, or more kind of indirect. Frequently we would come back from doing fieldwork, sit down with designers and engineers and start to think about, how do you find a way to talk about the findings of the research in a way that people can get their hands on, precisely to your question, right? What is the thing? And sometimes we built prototypes. They weren't necessarily things you were meant to produce, but they were a way of asking the question differently.
And Intel does not leave the building of those prototypes and actually the consumer products to your clients, but you really want to have that role yourself.
Well, sometimes the prototypes are never things that were going to be built. They're just an instantiation of an idea, right? They're a way of saying, if it looked like this, what would the other challenges be? If it needs to be this big, what do we have to think about to get inside that, right? What would the other technical affordances we might need to work through? What would the ecosystem be? Where would you buy it? How would you get content to it? And sometimes those are very hard questions to answer in the abstract. But when you've got a thing, it crystallizes the conversation really quickly.
Right.
Frequently, and it's still the case now, there are lots of different ways at Intel that we partner with people in the ecosystem. So we might partner to do joint research about users, enterprise or consumer. We might partner to do co-design. So here are some things we know that's technically really interesting. Here are some of the challenges you have. How do we make something together that does something interesting? So there really is, it's a broad spectrum of relationships between different kind of partners. And my team was a very small piece of that much larger puzzle, right? But there was also this kind of important way of starting to think a little bit differently, right? That wasn't about always start with the technology. It was sometimes about let's start with the thing we know people care about and make sure we're building the right technology to manage towards that. But it was different at different points in time.
Question from the audience always. Paulus Veldman, he says, silicon microprocessors seem to be reaching their limits quickly. What do you think will be next?
This is where I should say I'm the anthropologist. If you were to ask the engineers.
You talked about Moore's law.
Well, that's true. It's absolutely fair. You know, we would say that Moore's law has still a significant future ahead of it. The challenges are not insubstantial, and the technical work to be done there is difficult. But Moore's law has some time ahead of it, where it is still interesting work. And then, you know, the thing for me that's always interesting is what gets done on top of that, right? You know, we think about all of the places that integrated circuits at their most basic level now find their way, right? So, you know, you think about the very early days, maybe it was computers. And truthfully, when Gordon's article came out, the first thing he thought that circuits would be in, which is really ironic, was smart watches. Digital watches. You're like, wow, okay, from 1965 to now. Sort of there's that piece, right? But we know that, you know, part of what makes...
It's actually nice, it's the 50th anniversary of Moore's law. We have a video with Moore himself, one of the founders of Intel, wonderful. Who explains about Moore's law.
Actually, by a Dutch company, ASML made the movie. So
let's have a look.
Semiconductor is unusual technology. By making things smaller, everything gets better at the same time. The transistors get faster, the reliability goes up, the cost goes down. It's a unique violation of Murphy's Law. I was asked by Electronics magazine to predict what was going to happen in electronic components in the next 10 years. I looked at what we had been doing, and we were making integrated circuits with increasing complexity, but not very complex. The first ones had about 4 components on it. A year later, 8. And I plotted this out, and I thought, geez, from the introduction of the first planar transistor in 1959, the complexity on a chip had about doubled every year. And it was getting up towards 60 when I looked at it in 1965. And I wanted to predict that this was going to be the way to make electronics inexpensively, which was not generally acknowledged at that time. So I took this doubling every year and extrapolated it 10 years, from 1965 to 1975, from 60 components to 60,000 components on a chip. A pretty wild extrapolation. And it turned out to be ridiculously accurate.
It's very charming. It's the founder of Intel who actually draws the line. And
one of the 3 founders.
And says it is probably a ridiculous prediction, but it proved completely accurate.
It does. Well, and the original article is kind of fabulous too, right? Because it's one of those classic pieces of science written for a public audience. So, April 65. And it has this great opening paragraph, right, where he basically says, right, well, we're going to have these integrated circuits. What will we do with them? He says, well, clearly they will go into home computers, whether they are connected to some other thing or not. Like, oh, very good. Smart telecommunications, smart automobiles, and even digital watches.
Okay.
And sort of, it's delightfully prescient, right, was that he understood things that were already, in some ways, intensely loaded with electronics were only going to get more so. So telecommunications he understood as a place for that. He thought it would be switching centers, not all that telecommunication in your hand. Cars he saw, and in some ways he's an early advocate of that space. Watches, because that was actually the first thing that Intel made. We don't talk about it terribly often, but we did make early digital watches. What's fascinating when you ask Gordon about what he missed, he says the internet. He's like, in some ways, you know, the most significant thing that Moore's law has facilitated is the thing that he didn't really see it, right? And in some ways, how could he? It was completely beyond his framework. But there's something sort of amazing about how long it has been true.
Yeah, I have a question from Twitter for you, from Johan Schaap. Do you see a different attitude when it comes to people dealing and interacting with technology compared to the past?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We were talking about this a little bit before we came on air. I actually think it cycles. So I think there was a period of time in the last, I'd say probably between the middle of the aughts to about 2 or 3 years ago, where many of us were very compelled to get online and to use technology for everything, right? It was like, how much can we have? More. Like more technology, more stuff, more connectivity. Increasingly, I hear from some groups of users a kind of desire to rebalance it a little bit. So, are there times maybe I don't want to be connected, maybe I don't want to share everything, maybe I want to not take my laptop with me on holidays, maybe I want to kind of rebalance it a little bit, and I think there's a little bit more, I don't think it's ambivalence or skepticism, but a little bit more of a sense of where's the level,
the balance.
Right? The right balance.
Yeah.
And if we think about it, we've gone through a period of time where all that stuff was new and incredibly exciting and everywhere, to a kind of a moment of going, okay, maybe I want a little bit more of the physical world, maybe I want a bit more of real-time interactions, and there's sort of more of that stuff coming back, and I imagine we're going to go through a bit of that.
And how does what you say right now influence policies at Intel?
Well, that's a good question. We're certainly having a conversation about what the consequences might be if people decided to not always be on and always connected, right? What does that look like in terms of future demand cycles? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet. It's an open question. Will it be a trend or just a moment? Will 2014, 2015 be the 2 years where we talk a lot about digital detoxing? And then we go back to just being always connected? It's not clear yet.
No, we talked about that before we went on air, that it's really going up and down. And of course, we've had 10 years of extreme, fast innovation, mobile revolution, everybody being connected all the time. So, in your opinion, it's also like a natural process that we have to, and I think, start balancing a little.
Yeah, and I think, different people want that balance to look different, right? Some of it's about how do I have technology that does more for me without me having to tell it. Yep. Some of it's about how do I have better security so that I don't have to worry so much. Some of it's about how do I ensure the things don't require so much of my energy to make them work. And you see different pieces of that in some of the work we do at Intel, some of the work that is going on in some of the businesses.
But what you say right now is a lot about interfacing.
Yeah. And also about managing. So I think, there's something as a human being where you have to spend a lot of time looking for places to plug stuff in and connect things and worry about passwords.
Oh, it takes days. If you buy a new computer or...
It does, and there are ways of making that stuff easier, right? How do we think about inductive charging? How do we think about wireless charging? How do we think about better ways of doing passwords and security? And some of that work goes on at Intel, some of it is in the broader system.
You didn't back up your computer for 40 days, it says
it doesn't matter. There's nothing important.
How do you make that better too? Because hopefully, as human beings, we're
and then stupid computer, back up yourself. Back up yourself. That's what I always think when I get that.
And it doesn't.
It is the same thing, like you say, for example, security. Because we human beings are
the weak link.
The weak link all the time, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, and that's hardly anything new.
No.
Think about how many of us keep a key to our house somewhere outside our house.
I do. Anyway, I shouldn't say that. So we're on air. A question from Arnoud on Twitter. What type of device that doesn't exist yet would you really like Intel to help build?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm really interested in this whole space of semi-autonomous and autonomous objects. So everyone goes from that straight to robots. I'm not quite sure robots is the obvious endpoint. But if you think about the fact that we are moving into a world where there is an increasing amount of data, and you can start to use that data to do things, and some of that doing of things could be independent of humans needing to explicitly say something. So basically, a robot is just an algorithm with a plastic case around it or a metal case. Yeah. There's something for me about what does it take to drive that system in interesting ways. So, a lot of it is questions about machine learning and deep learning and cognitive computing and that whole space. So that's why I get vaguely technical, but not particularly. If you imagine we've come through a cycle of about 50 or 60 years where computing has really come off of kind of classic von Neumann architecture, so about number sets, big numbers, crunching data, crunching numbers, where the compute originally was about aiming guns. You were doing calculations to do better trajectory management, through to today. the way we think about how computing is architected doesn't necessarily work well for this other kind of set of questions about what would it be to have autonomous or semi-autonomous machinery or algorithms or robots or drones, whatever you want it to be, right? Or frankly, personal assistants that take care of you. So think about the next generation of Cortana or Siri or that whole crew, right? What does it mean to imagine those things? This sort of the traditional compute architecture doesn't really make sense. And there's this whole other bundle of ways of thinking about doing computing that are being explored in labs and in some companies. And for me, that space is fascinating. So more there.
Okay. You're a cultural anthropologist.
Even on the internet, yes.
Yeah, you said in the beginning you study people. One of the questions I have is, half of the population I think is online at the moment. The other half is coming online over the next 5 or 10 years. And a lot of them come from the African continent, for example. Completely different cultures, completely different people, completely different way of living. What does that mean for the kind of technology we have to develop when those people come online?
Well, when all kinds of different people come online, right? So I think, what's been fascinating is there are many parts of the world that are already online in ways that we don't anticipate, right? Whether it's using a mobile phone network rather than the classic internet, whether it's about different forms of connectivity. And some of the places that have come online in the last 5 or 10 years have brought with them really different ideas about things that are percolating through the whole system.
Give us an example.
Mobile phone as payment.
Yeah.
So mobile payment systems actually originated in Africa.
Yeah, I use it in 2000 already in Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it took
you send an SMS with credits from your
So basically you're sending,
phone.
you're using mobile minutes as a form of payment,
right.
but it was using the mobile phone system as a payment system.
Yeah, true.
It took a long time for that to come back into the kind of the emerged world, the West.
Yeah.
But it's been hugely popular here, right? So there's sort of interesting notion where, in fact, there are pockets of innovation happening all over the globe. We just don't do a good job of necessarily tracking them. And my suspicion is as different communities and different kind of cultures take on board the internet, it won't always look the same, right? It's not going to be the same device. It'll be different kinds of devices, right? It won't always be the same notion of the network. Some of it may be, I get my content from you, not the service provider. Some of it may be about how do you pay for it, may be different. It certainly is going to be regulated differently. What is allowed and what isn't allowed. It may be different experiences that are important. So, is it about a platform that tells you about healthcare warnings, lets you send remittance payments to your relatives, lets you send goats for particular religious ceremonies. There's a whole service of paying for goats over the internet and having them turn up at the other end. Whether it's about forms of online dating. All of those are going to look radically different in different markets, and even in ones that we would consider to be relatively stable, there are already new things happening that kind of challenge all of that stuff, right? Are we going to a world that's mobile first? Maybe. But, we also know that televisions are getting smarter, cities are getting smarter. So some of the, the smart city installations are not in the typical places. They're...
And that's a huge opportunity for Intel, of course.
I think it's a huge opportunity for all kinds of people. Not just Intel. And it's about, how do you think about what does it mean to talk about a smart city? What bit's getting smart? Is it the transportation system, the conversation you were just having? Is it the infrastructure in some other way? Is it for citizens? Is it for governance? What's the infrastructural build out? And all of those things, those are going to happen in lots of different places, right? Dubai is a really interesting example of a smart city, so is Singapore. They're doing completely different things in their smartness and solving for completely different problems. And so the reality is, at least my sort of sense of it, is there's going to be lots of different answers, right? And the trick is how you pay attention to all the different things in it. And that's always kind of fun. It's nice to have a conversation with pair of you and all you're doing is looking at your screens.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, both of us.
Yeah,
we don't listen now.
No, I know that's good.
We don't.
To each other or to me. That's good.
We just ask questions. Exactly. We wait till the guest stops, and then we have a list of questions. And hopefully, there's someone from the audience that helps us out.
Yeah,
that's the format of this show.
This is the future right here.
It's a very innovative format.
It's excellent.
Yeah, but I was thinking as well about the whole. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to understand maybe. The whole, like you say, the whole concept of smart city, because everyone is talking about the Internet of Everything or the Internet of Things and the smart city. It are such a sort of big things, and no one knows what it is yet.
Well, because there's also this lovely thing. It's like, what is the opposite of a smart city? Is it like a dumb city?
A dumb city,
which is a terrible thing to say. Would we say Amsterdam was dumb? Not really. So maybe it's smarter cities, maybe it's integrated cities. I mean, the language is always interesting, right, about what it sort of suggests about what the promise is. And, what's sort of going on there, right? What's being made smarter is always the question I want to ask. And the same with the Internet of Things, right? What's being connected and why? And what could we learn from the things that have already been connected?
For what reason? Yeah.
Well, and, there's been a whole history of things that have been connected in the past, right? The Internet of recently connected things is, fascinating, but it's not the first time we've connected and tracked things. We've been tracking, dolphins for a really long time. If you have a herd of cattle, chances are you know exactly where they are and you've tagged them. Yeah. We track human beings in all kinds of ways. So the notion that we suddenly have an Internet of Things is, for me, really interesting, right? It's a huge space and there's a tremendous amount of really interesting things to be done there. I mean, really interesting.
Yeah, but that's also a consequence of Moore's law, that technology to track things became really cheap. So suddenly we can afford to track
everything.
Everything.
But also not just the tracking of it, right? But also the sense making. So it's really sort of tempting to say what we're going to do is put a tag on every cow and that will be the end of it. Yeah. But the reality is
it generates data, we have the processing power to analyze the data.
But it also does other things, right? There's this lovely case, I mean, lovely in a kind of, in my world, maybe not in yours, in New Hampshire and Vermont in America. There are Internet of Things connected cows. So think of this as the Internet of cows, which is excellent, as you should. The Internet of cows, and the cows have RFID tags on their ears, so they know where the cows are. So the cows are themselves kind of smart objects now, smart cows. And the cows, don't laugh, it's serious. Sorry. You don't laugh about my smart cows. Because the smart cows can then trigger an automatic milking machine and they milk themselves. So no longer do the cows have to wait for human beings to come and milk them. They get to go trigger the machines with their ears themselves and they can get milked.
Yeah, and they understand that?
They do. Well, what's fascinating is once that system was introduced, it didn't take that long for the cows to work out they could milk themselves. And once they did that, they went from being milked by human beings twice a day, so dawn and dusk basically, to milking themselves 3 times a day. And they were very excited about that. Happy cows. Yeah. More milk. Yeah. And who would remember? Because it's a remembered thing, right? That the only reason we milk cows twice a day is what's convenient for us.
Right.
And so when the cows become internet connected, in charge, they want to milk themselves 3 times a day. If you were a lactating animal, this may make sense to you. It's like, I don't want to be standing around waiting. But so there's something sort of extraordinary, right, about what else will get revealed when things that have been forgotten or maybe invisible become visible again. It's, for me, this fascinating open question, right? I don't know where that goes yet, but there's something really tantalizing in what the story is about smart cows and smart sheep and smart cats and smart bees. Bees connected to the internet to study hive collapse. I don't know where any of that goes, right, but it starts to open up these really interesting questions about what do we really know about the world? What does it mean to have things be, if not sentient, making their desires visible, their activities visible in ways we're not used to seeing? I don't know where that goes, but I'm mesmerised by it.
No, it's very, very interesting. You travel the world and you study human behaviour in relationship to technology. What is the most interesting research you did last year?
People always
ask
me.
Or the most interesting observation?
People always ask me that question, like I know, like, the secret to it all.
You don't?
No, not at all. It's all very mundane at some level, which is kind of in and of itself fabulous. Melissa, I'm always reassured by the way people use technology, that they are, also trying to find ways to plug it in and recharge it and get things done, and, worried about their kids and their bank balances in equal measure. In terms of extreme things, so things right on the edges that I've seen, I know, of a case in England where someone took their smart transportation card, dissolved it in acetone to get out the RFID tags and embedded them in the skin under their hand so they could just swipe their hand at the tube station. Tube people not happy about that. That was seen as right on the edge of what was a good idea or not, right? I can think of people who've hacked their computers to make them work over long distances and, who are holding things together with duct tape and rubber bands right on the edge of the network because connectivity gets them to things they couldn't have otherwise. I've interviewed, I remember, a couple of people in Australia, one woman in particular, and I was asking her father about the internet. And he's like, well, that'd be Sarah. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, my daughter is Google. I'm like, well, how's she Google? He's like, well, I just call her when I need things. And I was like, don't you have a computer? He's like, why do I have a computer? I have a daughter. I just call her on the telephone. And she was Google. And as far as he was concerned, he had Google.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't need a screen, he didn't need a keyboard, he just had a mobile phone and his daughter who would always answer.
Yeah.
And there was something sort of, for me, really interesting about imagining you can experience the technology without ever owning it, right? That you could have these encounters with things we think of as being profoundly screen-based.
That's interesting, yeah.
Without ever needing to have a screen, right?
Yeah.
And there's sort of something about what does it mean to connect up all those people who aren't connected. It doesn't always mean putting devices in their hands.
No, we don't need a screen.
Well, he's still got one. So you're sharing one now.
Yeah. He's looking at my screen now.
Exactly. So I think all of those are kind of, they're interesting, right, about what those things mean about how people want to do things.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And because this the whole...
Yeah, I can talk for hours.
Yeah, that's the whole problem. So we have to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was it?
Will you join us for a drink at the Newmarket later on?
You have to buy me food, but yes.
Food?
Food.
Yeah, so we
Food
only have drinks. Oh, bitterballen. Bitterballen.
Bitterballen, nice. Yeah. Yes, okay. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Jullie bedankt voor het kijken. Even denken hoor, Steven. Ja, volgende week zijn we nog wel weer.
Ja, tuurlijk.
Dan is het...
Is het niet de Koningsdag of zo?
Nee, de dag, dat is ervoor. De maandag is Koningsdag. Dus,
maakt mij niet uit.
Nee, maar ook niet.
Ja.
Nou, dan hopen we jullie weer te zien. En wil je ons ondersteunen, wil je FMT-member worden, dan kan dat. Als het goed is, zie je nu inderdaad onder op je scherm hoe je dat doet. €10 per maand help je media over innovatie mogelijk maken. En we danken Streamzilla uit Groningen die ervoor zorgt dat iedere week deze livestream tot je komt. En nog meer mensen bedanken. Nee, bij YouTube kun je alles terugzien. fastmovingtargets.nl is de plek. En tot volgende week.
Dag.
Peter?